It was a shocking crime that happened back in 1992. A newly engaged British woman, a tourist, murdered on the streets of New Orleans. But what followed was an astonishing miscarriage of justice.
There aren't any other cases I know where somebody has been convicted of a crime that somebody else has already been convicted of, and where all the evidence from the witnesses at the scene suggest one person only committed that crime.
For years, two people who didn't know each other were both in prison for killing Julie Stott. So who really committed the crime, and why was the other left forgotten behind bars?
The fact that he was wrongly convicted and is in jail for something arguably he didn't do weighs heavily on me.
How could the American justice system have got it so wrong? The story starts on a warm night in New Orleans, Louisiana, 14th of April, 1992. Julie Stott and her boyfriend Peter Ellis were walking back to their hotel through the quiet streets of the city's famous French Quarter, where, unbeknownst to them, a crime spree had been taking place.
He said, "Give me everything you got, I'm gonna kill you." He then got in the car, started it up, turned on the charters going in the opposite direction of the traffic. I heard shots ring out, and I said, "He's got somebody."
And he had. A gunman had confronted the British tourists, Peter Ellis and Julie Stott, leaving Julie dead in the road. It was left to Detective James Stewart to try to piece together what happened.
As soon as they got here, he jumped out on them, pointed a gun at them, and I guess demanded money or whatever. They just didn't understand that that was a robbery, and they were trying to react to protect themselves. The shooter took a shot at Julie and hit her at least twice over here, and then he turned and shot at Peter, and he missed Peter, and then he got back in his car and drove off.
The death of 27-year-old Julie Stott hit the headlines here in New Orleans, but back in the UK it was front-page news as well. One newspaper offered a huge reward to try to catch the killer. Detective Stewart says offering that kind of money led to a deluge of calls from the public, a lot of them dead leads. But finally, police received one they thought might be of interest.
The tip came in, the caller remained anonymous, identified three guys, and the caller, because it was so soon after the murder, the way they were talking and describing certain things, this caller thought that they may have been involved with the murder. So we checked. That was one lead that we checked out pretty hard.
Among those named by the caller was 19-year-old Robert Jones. Police decided to act.
Just everywhere. We just heard noise, like, open up the doors,
In the middle of the night, they surrounded Robert's home.
They rushed in with their big guns, and they made everybody get on the floor, even the kids. It was just total chaos because everybody was hollering, and crying, trying to figure out what was going on. And that's when they asked for Robert.
It's over and done with, hopefully, for Robert Jones.
The next thing Kendra knew, she was watching Robert on the news, being marched to jail, accused of murder.
It was horrible. Everybody was in tears. Everybody was crying and in disbelief because, we would have never thought, that nobody would come here and just be like, oh, they're arresting Robert for, murder or any sort. So it was a horrible feeling.
Was there even a moment where you thought maybe Robert has done something wrong?
No, I didn't.
What made you so sure that Robert hadn't done anything wrong?
Because of the type of person he was. If anything, he would do something to help someone, not to hurt them.
Robert Jones had previously been suspected of drug offences, though he'd never had a conviction. Some in the UK media, though, thought they'd got their man. They were triumphant, claiming credit for the arrest. But Detective Stewart had huge doubts.
It wasn't like you could just arrest him and not tell the media about it. The media knew we arrested him, but I just thought that the headlines got a little overblown on that, because from our perspective, the task force guys, the guys that we were working together, you know, we knew there was a lot more work to do. We were having a hard time tying them back to the scene.
Well, the murder of Julie Stott was part of a crime spree that was happening here in the city's French Quarter at the time. Robberies, a rape, and then the killing. And in each case, there were very similar descriptions of the car that was used and of the attacker. But an early indication that Robert Jones was not that man was that even after his arrest, the crime spree continued. But detectives felt they finally got a real breakthrough when they found a car that matched the very distinctive descriptions. It didn't belong to Robert Jones, but to Lester Jones, who was no relation. When he was arrested, the crime spree did end. Lester Jones matched the witness descriptions, was found in possession of jewelry stolen in the robberies and rape, and one other major piece of evidence.
We searched his apartment and we found the murder weapon. We quickly had the gun examined. The ballistics guy over at our lab was able to tie the gun back to the bullets removed from Julie. Our opinion was, we can tie Lester to everything, we can't tie Robert to anything.
And what about tying the two of them together?
We tried that and we couldn't tie them together. There was no familial link, there was no school link. I think they were 12 years apart in age, so there was nothing to tie them together.
Lester Jones was convicted of Julie Stott's murder and sent to jail. But Robert Jones was never released. In fact, 4 years after he was first arrested, in a trial that lasted less than 10 hours, astonishing as it sounds, Robert Jones was also sent to prison for crimes in the same spree that Lester Jones had already been convicted of: rape, armed robbery, and the killing of Julie Stott.
This is a free call from
Rob,
an inmate at
the Louisiana State Penitentiary.
Hi Robert, it's Aleem.
The first time we spoke to Robert was on the phone. Since that fateful day in this courthouse, he'd been in Louisiana's infamous Angola prison.
Do you remember the moment that the verdict was announced and how you felt at that moment?
I can't even put it in words. It was a very crushing moment. I mean, it felt like I died, you know. When it said guilty, I was like, it can't be true. It was a moment of total despair for me.
That's amazing. So when did you do this?
This was sometime beginning of last year.
Robert's daughter, Bree, was born 8 months after he went to jail. She doesn't have any photographs with him, so her father painted a picture of them both together and sent it to her from prison.
Have there been particular moments where you thought, I really, really wish he was here right now?
Yeah, it's been a lot of them. From when I was younger, I mean, I'm 22 years old now, and I'm still young. And it's like, okay, I see my friends, they have their mother and their father, they could do this with them, ride bikes, go out to eat, spend time with them. I never really had them. Like, I had them, but I didn't have them. We always kept a relationship from me going to visit him and talk on the phone with him, but it's like, you're here, but you're not here. So I didn't really know, how to feel. Like, why don't let him come home now? It's been all this time, so I'm thinking, every year I'm thinking, okay, he gonna be home this year, he gonna be home this year. And it's like, okay, I didn't graduate high school, I'm about to graduate college, soon to be in my career, like, I still need my father.
So why did Robert end up in prison? We wanted to find the people who helped put him there. We'd been trying to locate Robert's lawyer at the time, who's accused of incompetence during the trial, but he never returned our calls. After several minutes on his doorstep, I noticed movement inside the car.
Excuse me? Sorry, I didn't see you there. I'm looking for Mr. Atkins?
Mm-hmm.
Court transcripts show Kirkland Atkins failed to grasp that another man had already been convicted for crimes in the same spree that Robert was accused of having committed. He still maintains he did a good job.
I represented Robert Jones and did not get a fee. So while the people on the side are sitting back criticizing and saying, you could have did this, you could have did that, you could have investigated this, you could have investigated that. They didn't spend the time. They could have went down there and represented Robert Jones.
You don't feel any responsibility for Robert Jones being in jail?
I did the best I could in representing Robert Jones at the time, during the time, and I think he got the best representation he could have got.
Lawyers from a charity, Innocence Project New Orleans, are representing Robert Jones now. They say it wasn't just mistakes by his lawyer that meant Robert went to prison, but something more sinister.
There aren't any other cases I know where somebody has been convicted of a crime that somebody else has already been convicted of, and where all the evidence from the witnesses at the scene suggest one person only committed that crime. It's a pretty extraordinary circumstance. The very frustrating thing about Robert's case is that all of the people who were prosecuting it in the first instance, in the early 1990s, turned a blind eye to the fact that it was pretty clear that Lester Jones had committed the crime. And even more than turned a blind eye, deliberately withheld that evidence from the jury and continued to prosecute Robert because they could. Not because they should, but because they could. And so when you look at Robert's case, it does involve, I think, some of the clearest evidence of innocence, but it also involves some of the most egregious wrongdoing on behalf of prosecutors that I've seen in any case.
It's now been shown state prosecutors withheld important evidence at Robert Jones's trial. Some of that evidence is still coming to light now. They also told the jury Robert Jones and Lester Jones were friends, even though detectives had said that wasn't true. Inside the Grand New Orleans courthouse, we met Calvin Johnson, the judge who presided over Robert's trial.
With Robert Jones, at the very least, in terms of how his trial played out in front of me, I can believe at least that it played out based on what we had and based on what we could do, played out in a fair way. The fact that he was wrongly convicted and is in jail for something arguably he didn't do weighs heavily on me.
He told us state prosecutors skewed evidence to present a compelling case framing Robert Jones. But why? Judge Johnson says at the time the state seemed to be trying to put behind bars as many young black men as possible.
That was the driving thing or force in this town, in this area, for decades before Robert Jones and since Robert Jones. I mean, it has changed some, but not totally changed. In that how we operate the criminal justice system in Louisiana, or for that matter, how we operate the criminal justice system across the South, where race is such an issue, you see the same things play out.
What does it say that he is still, 23 years after he was arrested, he is still in prison? What does that say about how much he is valued?
Well, he isn't. And that the way we look at the Robert Joneses, if not today, previous to today, but if he didn't do this, he did something else. And he therefore got away with doing something else or some things else, and therefore his punishment is not justified for this particular act, is justified for other things he did and got away with.
An extraordinary admission to say black men were being put away because the authorities felt they had probably done something to deserve prison, even if it wasn't the crime at hand. But tell it to African Americans living in New Orleans and they won't be the slightest bit surprised, though it is hard to prove definitively. What is clear is that for many years, whatever the reason, there was something badly wrong with the justice system in this city.
This is not the only case. There have been other cases where prosecutors either intentionally or negligently withheld evidence. So I don't think there is a question about that. The best I can do is let's move forward. From this point, from the moment I took office, what we said we were going to do is those things are not going to happen. We're going to do the very best we can to see to it that every person who comes into the justice system in Orleans Parish is treated fairly.
But that didn't stop the district attorney fighting against any court ruling that Robert Jones's trial was unfair. But in summer 2015, the Supreme Court finally dismissed the state's appeals, saying Robert had not had a fair trial. And in November 23 years and 7 months after he was first arrested, members of Robert's family waited outside New Orleans Parish Jail for him finally to be released.
Oh my gosh, I need a hug. Jesus Christ. Wait, one more. It's okay. Yo, his cookie. Everything is all right.
It's all right.
It's all right right
It'll
now.
be all right.
What was yesterday like, walking out?
Oh, it was wonderful. It's a beautiful feeling. It was something I always, actually I couldn't have dreamed of that feeling. I imagined it, but I couldn't. It's something that was unimaginable. It's nice, beautiful.
What do you remember about it?
I remember about yesterday was the burden of all this weight of being incarcerated all these years, just being lifted. It's like I wanted to fly.
If you try to explain what it's like to be in prison for something that you weren't involved in, how can you explain to others what that felt like?
A complete nightmare, actually. A real nightmare. It was, you can't find a word in the dictionary to describe the cruelty that, that relies on one's mind in dealing with something like that. Prison life is just rough, man, So it's a deeper grade of injustice to one when you're innocent. So it's real rough.
How did you get through it?
My faith in God, and I developed a system of actually just grabbing on to the positive things that happened in my life throughout the course of the years. It's a true saying that, the truth will set you free one day when you can find it. And that was a problem for us as well as for me. It's actually just finding the truth. The truth was buried so deep.
But in spite of all that's come to light since his conviction, Robert's not in the clear yet. The district attorney is still insisting he faces a retrial.
If the defendant does not receive a fair trial, then he is entitled to have any conviction that may have resulted from that vacated, and then we proceed to give him a fair trial. I think sometimes people equate the fact that someone did not receive a fair trial with the fact that the defendant may be innocent.
But Robert's lawyers feel that on the basis of what we know today, the district attorney should dismiss his case, one that should never have gone to trial in the first place.
The evidence that was withheld is not some evidence about fairness. It's not a little bit of evidence that might tip the balance. It was evidence that Lester Jones did the crime. So it's not some technicality that means he didn't get a fair trial. The district attorney's office, over several prosecutors and several years, withheld key evidence from Robert Jones's defense. Robert Jones now, having to defend himself against charges of a crime that happened 24 years ago, is utterly crippled in his ability to present his defense, not through any fault of his own, but because the state refused to comply with the Constitution when it tried him the first time.
Robert says he's determined to continue the fight to officially clear his name and get justice.
Say, for instance, there's a guy that, as what they say, live in no disgrace neighborhood, take and pull out a pistol, rob somebody, and kill somebody, right? Okay, and you look at him as a cold-blooded murderer, okay? But here you have a district attorney that takes and would hold favorable evidence from a guy, take his life, send him to prison, and most guys, they die in prison, they're innocent people, all right? So what's the difference? The downside of that, I watched a lot of guys die in prison. I watched a lot of guys die in prison.
lot of them was my dear friends too.
And Robert counted 39 prisoners he knew in his 23 years in prison who he was convinced were innocent, but who died behind bars.
How many Robert Joneses do you think there are in Louisiana?
Louisiana. Well, New Orleans, let's start here. Louisiana, let's go there. The South, let's end up there. And we can always obviously we can go to America. But our justice system is replete with Robert Joneses. Replete with individuals who, because of how the justice system is operated over the last decades, picked a number, we've ended up with a Robert Jones result. We've ended up with people who were wrongly prosecuted. We ended up with people wrongly convicted. We've ended up with people who had mountains of evidence not provided which could have exonerated them. We've ended up in America with this.
My case give a lot of guys hope because of the fact that they know that I'm going to stand and know I'm going to fight. And I'm going to fight to the end. And it gives them hope. It gives them hope, give them an opportunity for to create a better system for them. To create a better system for them. So that's another added thing that actually gives me the strength to fight for a lot of those guys too.
What you say this one is?
That's mushroom with pesto.
Remarkably, Robert says, in spite of his 23.5 years in prison for something he didn't do, he's not bitter or angry. He does, though, want justice and assurances others won't go through what he did. But that's a tall order, and Robert still has to clear his own name in a